With over 20 years in the industry, I've seen a lot of product. Nanofill from Berkley is one of the most revolutionary fishing lines ever introduced. Nano means small, minuscule, microscopic. And Fill emphasizes the hundreds of stronger than steel Dyneema nanofilaments that, after molecular linking and shaping, create the world's first unifilament fishing line. Berkley Nanofill Unifilament. It's the next generation in fishing lines.
Hey, this is Monroe. You know, we did Punching 101. Now we're on Punching 201. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on the equipment, the tying of the snell or the not tying of the snell, what you look for in the cover, and pretty much a lot more in depth about punching in general. So first thing we're going to start out with is, you know, the line size. Line size is very, very key and very, very important. You know, I use a minimum of 65-pound braid. The brand that I use is Maxima Braid. Maxima Braid is new for this year, and what it is it's not super stiff, it's not super limp, it's actually a good mix in between, so you can feel the bait, you don't get a lot of that grinding noise through the guides or when you're actually punching mat. So having 65-pound Maxima Braid is definitely key when you're out there punching. You know, maybe 70, maybe 75, maybe even 80, but nothing less than 65 pound. You know, for me, 65-pound Maxima Braid allows me to set the hook on these fish, yank them out of that cover, and never ever break off. Now let's get into the reel that we spool up the braid on. The reel that I use is the Daiwa Zillion Type R. It's a 7:3-to-1 gear ratio reel. It's a high gear ratio reel. What it is when you make those pitches, it allows you to pull that slack up and set the hook on those fish without losing them. But it has a low enough gear ratio that you can actually pull those fish out of that heavy matted grass. You start getting into those 8.0s or those 9.0s, and I think you're getting a little bit too much high gear ratio. It's kind of like having a bicycle when you're going up the hill. You know, that lower gear ratio is a lot easier for when you're going up the hill. You might take more turns, but it's still going to get you up there a whole lot easier. This reel comes with 13 pounds of drag, and the 13 pounds of drag is going to allow me to completely lock the drag down. When you're fishing 65-pound braid, you're not going to use drag at all. Actually, I don't use drag at all in any kind of fishing that I do. I allow the rod to do its job. So now that we got the 7:3-to-1, we got the 13 pounds of drag on the Daiwa Zillion Type R, let's get into the rod. Well, this is a rod that I developed. It's the Daiwa Steez 8-foot flipping stick. This 8-foot flipping stick is basically the ultimate for punching in my eyes. It's not the meat hammer rod that you would think of that you would need for punching. One thing is to me, it's more a medium heavy to a heavy action rod versus being a heavy to an extra heavy action rod. When you get into that heavy and extra heavy action rod, when you make that pitch into that mat and you set the hook on that fish, something's got to give. And when you have that super stout rod, you're either going to pop that fish's mouth open with the weight, or you're going to tear that fish's mouth open with the hook, and you don't want to do that. So with this rod here, I have it set up as what we call a bungee action. You make that pitch in there, you bow up on a fish, he pulls, and then the rod stops. When that rod stops, that rod is pulling back without you pulling on it, and it's going to bungee that fish through the mat. So the Daiwa Steez 8-foot flipping stick to me is definitely a huge part of my punching. You know, 8-foot is great because it allows you to make a little bit further pitches, a little bit further flips, and you have a lot more leverage on those fish. So remember, get yourself a good flipping stick, something like I said, a cross between a medium heavy and a heavy action, and not on the heavy towards the extra heavy action, because you will lose a lot of fish. So we got the rod, we got the reel, we got the line. Now we got to get into the baits and a couple different things that I do. Well, first of all, when I'm punching, I'm always having 2 rods rigged up. So I've got the new River to Sea New Jack flipping hook, which I designed. It has a double eye on it. You know, I'll get into that a little bit more in a second. River to Sea 1 ounce and 1.5 ounce tungsten weight. I always try to rig up one of each because the speed definitely determines how the fish will eat it. Sometimes they want it faster, sometimes they want it slower. I always rig at least one of these with Paycheck Baits custom skirt. This one here is called Cash Money. I personally came up with this color. It matches the Candy Grass D-Bomb that I really like to use. So when I'm out there punching, I've got two setups. And so now we're going to get into the first one. 1.5 ounce weight, River to Sea Trash Bomb, Paycheck Baits custom color Cash Money punch skirt, and the Missile Baits D-Bomb. I forgot to show you this, but the first thing I put on is a Paycheck Baits punch stop. You know, Bub Tosh designed these, and when he designed these for punching. As you can see, they have a taper to them so that you get a little point that helps go through the mat a whole lot easier, and they slide right on just like you would if you got bobber stops. I only need one of these because they have it that they're so tight that they very rarely slide. So first thing that goes on is the Paycheck Baits punch stop. Next goes on your River to Sea 1.5 ounce trash bomb. Slide it through the hole. Very, very simple. Next comes your skirt. Get your skirt tied on there. The one thing about the Paycheck Baits punch skirt, you know, it gives it a little bit bigger profile. Sometimes the fish want a big profile, sometimes the fish don't want a big profile, but you gotta let the fish dictate to you. One thing that a lot of people do is they get stubborn when they're out there fishing and they don't let the fish dictate to them on how they want it. You know, you're trying to catch them, so you might have to do things not the way you're normally used to doing it, but the way that the fish want it. So now that we got that tied on there, we are going to go to the 6.0 New Jack Flipping Hook by River to Sea. We're going to start off with the snell. First thing you do is you go through the eye, like so. So now that you're at the front of the eye, give yourself plenty of slack to tie this knot. Because it will take you a few extra seconds, but I'm going to show you the reason why we do this. So now, you have the line going through the front of the eye, you have the tag in coming out the back side. All the action happens between the back side of the eye and the tip of your fingers. You pull, you do a half hitch, and you slide it up over the tag in and the bottom of the hook. And then you cinch it. That's the first one. Once you got the first one, that's always the hardest one. The rest is real easy. Once again, the back side of the eye and where you made that last knot, half hitch, slide over. And make sure you take that first knot and go over the top of the second one. And then you can go again 3 times, again 4 times. I always have this little inside confidence thing, you know, when I'm fishing little fish lakes and I'm catching 4-pounders, I only tie it 4 times. But when I want to catch 5 and 6-pounders, I tie it 5 times. When I'm out in California and I'm fishing for big giant ones, I go 6 or 7 times. And you can actually just tie this knot 3 times and it'll actually be really secure and it won't slip on you. So I tie the snell like so. And now you have a perfect snell knot. You got it? Cut the tag in. Actually get you some braid scissors. River to Sea makes some really great braid scissors. Cut it like that, like so. Now here's the reason for the snell. Is you got your bait, and as you can see, as that hook is sitting there, it actually is hooking upwards. So now your bait's straight, and you're out there, you're fishing alone. Bait sitting there like that. When you go to set that hook cavitates upwards like so. And when it cavitates upwards, when you go to set that hook, you're going to increase your hooking percentage of hooking those fish in the roof of the mouth, which is the hardest part, which won't really tear. And when you hook those fish in the roof of the mouth or hook them in the eye, they're not going anywhere. So that's the reason that we tie the snell knot on our straight shank hooks. Now we get rigged up with the missile baits. D-bomb. The D-bomb's been my bait of choice. You know, it's a creature bait, imitates crawdads, imitates bluegill, imitates a lot of different things out there that the fish really seem to key on. You know, and so you rig it Texas style, where you take the hook point, go through, and they've actually created a little open slot there for that hook to come out. Take it in, twist, put it through, and you're ready to go. There's your punch rig with the Paycheck Baits punch skirt. Like I said, anytime I'm out there fishing, I'm always rigged up with two. So I'm going to go through without the Paycheck Baits punch skirt on there. Start out again with the punch stop. Got your punch stop on there. Always use that. The punch stop is going to allow that to pull the bait through, that the whole package goes through the mat. When you punch it in there and you don't have this punch stop, what's going to happen is that weight's going to slide through and it's going to leave that bait, and you'll see it going down, but you won't know that the bait's still sitting at the top of the mat. And the fish, if he eats the weight, you're definitely not going to get him because you don't have the hook. So making sure that you have the punch stop on there is key. Now, same thing with the weight, going through, same size line, same rod, same reel, everything's the same. And then you got your hook. Well, this time what I'm going to do is with the new jack flipping hook. The reason I designed this hook is a lot of people have a hard time snelling a knot on there, or they don't know how to snell. So now you can pretty much use any knot you want by going through the first eye and then tying to the second eye, like so. I just use a clinch knot. The only knot that you cannot use with this is a Palomar knot, because you can't make the loop to go over the hook shank. So you do whatever favorite knot that you want to. I'm just going to use a clinch knot on this one. Sealed, cut the tag in with these super sharp scissors. And now what you're going to do is, for all of you guys who can't tie the snell knot, you're going to get the same cavitation of that hook swinging upwards, which, like I said, is what's going to be key for hooking those fish in the mats. So now, for you guys who can't tie the snell knot, you can tie pretty much any knot you want except for a Palomar on the new jack flipping hook by River to Sea. Same missile baits D-bomb without the skirt on it. Texas rig the same way. Now you're pretty much ready to go flipping. So now that we've got rod, reel, line, hooks, weights, stops, skirt, no skirt, everything's tied up, ready to go. Now we got to get into an area of what to look for in a mat. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually show you different kind of things, and I'm going to point out certain sections of the mat and some of the keys to look for. You know, when I get out there punching, I don't spend a lot of time, you know, getting focused on one part of the mat. I do fish it all, but there's certain things that I will pay extra attention to make sure that I make an extra flip or I make the right flip to that mat, such as a point in the mat, such as a different type of grass in the mat, such as something object that might be hard, there might be a piece of wood in there. Those are the kind of things that you definitely have to look for. Anytime I come to a lake and not really sure on, you know, what type of structure that the fish are going to butt underneath when you're fishing a mat. When you look at this kind of section right here, you've got several different types of structure. You've got a hyacinth mat, you've got a little more hyacinth, you've got some blown in tules and grass mat. You know, it doesn't have to necessarily be vegetation. It could be blown in wood. It can be anything that, you know, creates a canopy for these fish to hide up underneath. You know, we've got a little pennywort there, but another key thing that we have is we have a lot of little points, you know, on these mats. And so what you want to concentrate is, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 major points that the fish are going to be your high percentage spots, because they create ambush points where the fish will actually eat the bait. So I'm going to flip down through here, you know, try to figure out what the fish are underneath. You know, if they're underneath hyacinth mat, then I know to kind of key in on the hyacinth mat. If they're underneath the blown in hydrilla and the blown in tule mat, then I know to key in on that. If they're on the pennywort mat, I know to key in on that. You know, one cool thing is, you'll see as we go down through here, is there'll be different levels of hyacinth. You know, there'll be some really short stuff, there'll be some middle stuff, and there'll be some taller stuff. I really like to key in on that taller stuff, because that means that that mat has been sitting there for a long period of time. When that mat's underneath there for a long period of time, that means those fish have been underneath there probably a long time and haven't seen a bait. And it's also harder to get through, so I spend a little extra time trying to get through the mat. The harder it is to get through the mat, the higher your percentage goes up on getting key strikes. And I think that's what a lot of people will try to punch through there, and once they don't get through there, they're going to actually just keep on going. Well, me, I will make sure I get through that mat, because that's the place that the biggest fish is probably going to live. So let's go punching. There's a couple different techniques on, like, when I'm punching. You know, for the close targets, I really like to just do a standard flip, you know, where you can flip into the hole to make sure it goes down and through. So, you know, the standard flip is basically taking it, putting the line in your hands, get through there, and that pendulum motion. You know, it's definitely able to be a little bit more accurate with the flipping motion when I come up to a mat. One thing, you know, I run a motor guide trolling motor, super duper quiet. I got it tuned down to be really, really quiet. You know, one thing is you're fishing close targets, you're taking your time going through here, and you want to make sure that you cover this water thoroughly. But like I said, one thing is, like, we're coming up here, we're coming up to a point. This point I really, really like, and I'm ready to expect a bite, because I've got blown in hydrilla, I've got hyacinth point, I've got tules mixed in here. There's a lot of different things and a lot of different places. I always stick with the point when I flip first before I flip back into, you know, the heavier, thicker stuff, because what you can do is you flip that point, you catch one out of there, you still got those fish that you haven't spooked further back. But if you flip back there and you catch one back there, most likely you're going to spook the fish that's sitting out here on the point, and you want to increase your odds. And so increasing your odds when you're punching is key. You know, one thing that you'll see me do is when I flip, I flip anywhere from a 3 to 5 foot radius on an area. I feel like a fish is going to swim within 3 to 5 feet of where I last punched to eat that bait. So I won't spend a lot of time picking it part by part unless you're continually getting bites out of the same mat. So 3 to 5 foot pitches, always pitch to that point first before you actually go back in. You know, you look at this mat that's coming up here. This is what I was talking about having an older mat that has hyacinth that's grown a little bit taller. So this mat's been there a little bit longer, which is, once again, your high percentage spots. So you got to pay attention to the high percentage spots and be ready to set the hook. You know, and once again, when you're setting the hook, you set the hook. You don't ever set the hook on a, what I call, slack line. You always want to set the hook with a little bit of an angle to your rod, and it's a pull hook set, pressure hook set, and it's a hard pressure hook set. And what that does is it allows that weight to slip through the fish's mouth, and then all he's got is hook coming at it. Like you see this mat here, it's a little harder to get into. I will try to figure out a way to get through this mat. And if worst case scenario, and you can't get through in a couple of flips, you do the old school, you flip it up in the air and you try to punch it through, and that's why they call it punching. See, you heard it go through. Now it's down in a very super high percentage area for you getting bit. Not a lot of guys have actually paid attention, you know, to that spot because it's so hard to get through. They just give up on it. And when you get to fish a spot that a bass hasn't seen a bait, first of all, he's probably going to be big. Secondly, he's going to be super duper aggressive. You know, when I'm fishing tournaments, I really like to, you know, start out with the skirt to see how the fish are reacting to it. If the bite's a little slow, then I will, you know, go away from the skirt and use just the straight D-bomb by itself and let the fish tell me what they want. But once again, after I've, you know, got a good limit on the one without the skirt, I might go back to the skirt just to try to get a bigger bite, because it's kind of like when you used to fish, you know, a worm and a lizard versus fishing a jig. You always caught less fish on a jig, but you always caught bigger ones. So for me, when I'm fishing tournaments, I'm always looking for a little bit bigger bite. So that's why I always try to start with the skirt first, and then if they're not eating it really well, then I'll go to the one without the skirt. Pay attention to depth changes in the mats. You know, if you flip to a section and it goes down 5 feet, you know, then you flip back a little further and it goes down, you know, 3 feet. Well, you know that there's obviously a break there. And just like if you're fishing offshore structure, anywhere that there's a break, that's going to be your high percentage spot. So you can spend a lot more time flipping around that break in that mat and probably catching a few more fish. Here's a couple of other little tricks that a lot of people don't know. Is fishing a 7:3 to 1 gear ratio, I know how many turns of the handle is. One turn of the handle is 3 feet of line. So when I pull it in the mat and I take one full turn of the handle, that lets me know that I just winded up 3 feet of line. So that tells me how deep it is underneath that mat. 2 turns of the handle, which that was a turn and a half, that lets me know that it's 4.5 feet underneath that mat, which is definitely something to pay attention to. So when I talk about the depth, you know, that's how you can tell how deep the water is. By a 7:3 to 1 does 3 feet of line on one turn of the handle. You know, an 8 does more, a 6 does less. So figuring out those little key things too also make a difference. You know, sometimes when you make that pitch to the mat and it doesn't go through, take a couple little short hops and give it an opportunity to try to find that hole. You know, the majority of your strikes are going to come from when you first go through that hole, they're just going to eat it right away. That weight's going by them so fast, they don't have an opportunity to think about it, you know. People always go, well, isn't that weight too heavy? It goes by them and it triggers a strike. That's why I believe punching is so effective, is that it triggers a fish into biting even though they're not hungry. It's kind of like you're sitting at home all of a sudden you smell pizza, even though you might not be hungry, you smell pizza, you're going to go ahead and eat that pizza. So it's a triggering effect for when that bait goes by these fish, it just triggers them into striking. It's animal instinct, you know. So that's why the big weight works so well. Now we're getting into some different vegetation. You know, like I said, the one thing that I did like about this spot is it had 3 or 4 different types of matted vegetation. And now we're into some pennywort, so it allows me to check to see, you know, I flip through and flip some of that matted hydrilla, I flip some of the matted tules, I flip some of the hyacinth, and I haven't got a bite yet. And so I'm hoping to get a bite in this kind of vegetation, which will tell me what the fish are keying in on. And now what you see me doing is you actually see me making pitches, just because I want to go back a little further. And a pitch is basically same pendulum motion, but the bait swings freely without me grabbing it and putting it into those same kind of areas where I feel the big fish are living. Once again, we're coming back up to a key little spot here. It's a point coming out. So make that pitch to the point. And those are the fish that are active. Those are the fish that are feeding, are the fish that are sitting right there. Those fish are waiting for something because you've got an ambush point there. You notice, flip to the point, flip 3 to 5 feet back, flip 3 to 5 feet back even further. You know, I will go all the way back as far as I can feel comfortable, you know, with getting a bite. You know, and then there's going to be times where you're going to have to take your boat and you're going to have to drive your boat up into that mat. And I mean, there's been times where you would have swore that I was four-wheeling in my Ranger 520, you know, with my Yamaha, and just right over the top into that stuff to land that fish. And you don't try to pull that fish out of there because, once again, something's got to give. Rod, line, or fish's mouth, and the weakest link is going to be that fish's mouth because it's going to tear. So you get him up there pegged, and you hold him, and you drive in there and you get him. Folks, you know, we've been out here and we did, you know, 101. Now this is 201. I wanted to just get a little bit more in depth since we had such a great response to 101. I figured I had to go to 201 to do this for you guys. I mean, if you take these techniques and apply it to your punching, you're definitely going to put more fish in the boat, and that's what we're out here for. So give it a try.
And if you don't know, now you know. Yeah. Second to you again, bud. Tell you what, next tournament, I won't use my hydro wave. I don't believe you, so you know what, bud? I'm taking it with me. Go ahead. Thanks, bud. You know what, Kevin? You know, he actually may be pulling for me. He's nuts if he thinks I'm giving up my hydro wave. What a squirrel.